My name is Harper Whitman, and I am 68 years old. I've spent most of my life working with my hands, building a home for myself and my family, and raising my daughter Cassidy on my own. I'm not a woman who complains much, preferring to meet life's demands quietly. But this morning, I felt the weight of years pressing down on my chest. I was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes for Lila, while the sunlight filtered through the old curtains, when I heard Cassidy's voice coming from the living room. She was on the phone, and the tone sharp, dismissive, impatient, made my heart clench. I can't stand having her around anymore. You don't understand how much trouble she causes. That old lady only makes things worse. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Trouble. That was what I had become in my own home. I stood frozen, the spatula slipping from my hand with a dull clatter on the tile. My mind spun, tracing back to long nights of work, scraped knuckles from painting the house, sick days spent at Cassidy's side when she was little, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, suddenly condensed into that single cruel label, Doña Consuelo's voice, faintly in the background, chuckled or agreed. She had always enjoyed pushing Cassidy's opinions, whispering suggestions, sowing the seeds of impatience and judgment. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe steadily. The kitchen felt smaller, the walls closing in. I quietly carried the plates to the table, my hands trembling, knowing that nothing would be the same once these words settled in my heart. I sank into the worn chair at the corner of the kitchen, trying to steady my shaking hands. The sunlight bounced off Lila's bright eyes as she hummed quietly, flipping through a picture book on the floor. My granddaughter had always been gentle, her innocence a stark contrast to the harshness I had just overheard. I watched her small fingers trace the pages, and I thought about the years I had devoted to Cassidy, years that felt suddenly invisible. When Cassidy was little, her father had left, and I was alone with a tiny girl who needed everything. I worked 3 jobs at once, days in a bakery kneading dough, evenings sewing at a factory, nights cleaning offices just to keep a roof over our heads and pay for her school. There were nights I sat awake at her bedside when she was sick, listening to her labored breaths, whispering prayers until the early hours, rubbing her small back and counting each feverish shiver. I remember the icy January mornings, the frozen sidewalks on my walk to the bus stop after delivering her lunch to school, and the pennies saved from my meager wages for a single pair of shoes or a warm coat. I had built this house brick by brick with my own hands and paycheck, imagining a place where Cassidy could grow safely, where she could dream without fear. And now, after decades of sacrifices, I felt the sting of her words, as if they erased everything I had done. Lila's laughter pulled me from the memory, soft and pure, and for a moment, it reminded me why I had endured it all. Her tiny presence grounded me, anchoring me to the life I had created. Even when it felt like everyone else had forgotten my worth, I closed my eyes, breathing slowly, and whispered into the quiet kitchen, "I did this all for you, and I still will." The smell of bacon and scrambled eggs filled the kitchen, but it did nothing to lighten the weight in my chest. Cassidy sat at the table, scrolling through her phone, barely glancing at the plate I had prepared for her. "Mom, this scrambled egg is dry," she said, her voice sharp. "Couldn't you get it right even once?" Ethan, as always, didn't intervene. He sat quietly beside her, pretending not to notice, his hands folded on the table. The silence between them felt heavy, pressing down on me as I forced a smile. I offered her a sip of orange juice. "Here. Sweetie, maybe this will help?" She swirled it around in her glass, barely acknowledging me. Then Doña Consuelo's voice floated in from the hallway. "Oh, Harper, maybe next time you should let Cassidy cook. It would save you so much trouble." Her tone was light, but the sting was sharp. She had always enjoyed slipping these remarks in. The subtle poison that reminded me I wasn't fully welcome. I lowered my eyes to Lila, who sat quietly, tracing the patterns on her placemat. She looked up and smiled at me, her small hand reaching out to touch mine, the warmth of her fingers and the softness of her voice. "I like it." Grandma gave me a tiny anchor amidst the barbed words. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. For decades, I had endured far greater storms, long nights of work, sick days, scraped hands and knees, but these little jabs cut differently. They were constant, persistent reminders that the home I had built, the love I had poured into my family, was now taken for granted. I turned to clean the dishes, letting Lila's laughter echo softly in the kitchen, and braced myself for another day filled with invisible battles and small humiliations that no one outside this house could see. I sank onto the worn sofa, my hands still damp from washing dishes. The house was quiet now, Lila having gone upstairs to play with her doll, and even Cassidy and Ethan had left for the day. I picked up my phone and hesitated only a moment before dialing June Alvarez. June had been my friend since high school, the one person who had seen every struggle, every sacrifice, and every moment I thought I couldn't go on. Her cheerful voice greeted me immediately, soft and familiar. "Harper, how are you?" I swallowed and let the words tumble out. I told her about breakfast, Cassidy's sharp remarks, Ethan's silence, and Doña Consuelo's subtle jabs. I confessed the loneliness, the feeling of invisibility in the home I had worked a lifetime to build. My voice wavered at the edges, and June listened without interruption. Finally, she leaned into the words I had feared. "Harper, you know you still have power, right? The house is yours. You're the primary owner, legally. Nothing stops you from setting boundaries or taking control. You've earned that right every day of your life." Her reminder hit me like sunlight through a clouded window. I had been living in the shadow of fear and habit, forgetting that decades of effort had given me not just responsibility, but authority. I exhaled, a weight lifting from my chest, and felt the first flicker of determination stir. June's voice, calm yet insistent, planted seeds of empowerment that had been dormant far too long. For the first time that morning, I pictured a life where I was not just tolerated, but in control of my own home and my own dignity. I sat at the old oak desk in the corner of my living room, a stack of papers spread before me like a small fortress. Deeds, bills, bank statements, and every document I had meticulously kept over the decades, all of it had suddenly taken on a new urgency. I traced my fingers over the embossed seal of the property deed, feeling the weight of my ownership in a way I hadn't allowed myself to before. Cassidy and Ethan had always assumed this house was theirs to manipulate, but after June's call, I realized I had been underestimating my own authority. I organized the papers, checked every account balance, and confirmed all utility bills were up to date. Each task felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself. The house, my labor, my money, it was mine, and I would no longer cede control silently. The emotional toll of decades spent giving without pause rose up in memory. I remembered nights stitching school uniforms by dim lamplight, the winter mornings when we had no heat, and the scraped knees I kissed and cleaned without complaint. I had built this life, and now, for the first time, I felt the right to defend it. Meanwhile, in subtle ways, Doña Consuelo continued her influence. From the corner of my window, I could glimpse her urging Cassidy and Ethan to act quickly, to pressure me into leaving, to suggest the retirement home as a solution. Her presence made the stakes feel higher. She thrived on control, on the idea that I was too old to fight back. I closed my eyes for a moment and drew a deep breath, feeling the tension tighten in my chest. I would need a plan that was precise, patient, and unshakable. The confrontation could not be a tantrum. It had to be a demonstration of calm authority, the culmination of a lifetime of care, labor, and quiet strength. As I stacked the last documents neatly, I felt a flicker of clarity and resolve. I could protect what was mine, assert my dignity, and still leave space for love. It was time to turn knowledge into action, to let decades of devotion guide the next steps in a life I refused to surrender. I was folding laundry in the living room when Cassidy's voice floated from the hallway, sharp and insistent. "I can't keep doing this. Ethan, Mom is always in the way. Maybe we should consider a retirement home somewhere she'll be cared for." Ethan's voice was quieter, cautious, almost reluctant, but he didn't oppose her. "I know, but is that really the only option?" I paused mid-fold, listening without moving. My heart thumped, but I did not speak, did not react. There was a strange clarity in simply hearing their plan, in understanding that they assumed I was powerless. Their conversation ended, and for a moment, silence filled the house. From the corner of the room, I caught a glimpse of Doña Consuelo leaning against the doorway, her expression tight with impatience. "It's time to act," she murmured, barely hiding her judgment. "She's getting older. Harper, you know how fragile she's become. You have to make a move before it's too late." Her words were meant to unnerve me, to make me doubt myself. But instead, they sharpened my resolve. I straightened, feeling the weight of every year of labor, every sacrifice, every sleepless night. They could not intimidate me into surrendering the life I had built. I returned to the pile of documents on the desk, my hands steady now, my mind methodical. Every step I had taken, the organization of deeds, the verification of accounts. The planning was not just preparation, it was strategy. I would not react impulsively. I would act deliberately. Their underestimation was my advantage. Doña Consuelo's urgings, Cassidy's impatience, Ethan's quiet compliance, all of it sharpened the stakes, and I would meet them with calm authority, grounded in decades of work, love, and perseverance, ready to claim what was rightfully mine. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I dialed Arturo Ramirez's number, my heart steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling in my head. I had known him for years, a reliable presence when I had needed guidance on financial matters, and now I needed him for something far more personal. "Harper Whitman," I said, when he answered, my voice calm but firm. "I need to confirm my status as primary homeowner and discuss next steps to protect my property." Arturo's voice was reassuring. "Of course. Ms. Whitman, I'm here to help. Let's go over everything carefully." We reviewed the deed, the co-ownership papers that listed Cassidy alongside me, and the history of the property. I listened as he explained the legal rights I had long overlooked in my own home. He detailed the steps I could take to assert my authority, including serving formal notices to my daughter and son-in-law. Each word grounded me further, transforming fear into certainty. The next morning, I quietly began gathering the necessary documents, arranging them in neat folders on the desk. Bills, bank statements, property records, all meticulously organized. As I worked, I could sense the subtle shift in the household. Cassidy and Ethan moved through the kitchen with a stiffness I hadn't seen before. Doña Consuelo lingered in the hallway, her eyes sharp, trying to gauge what I was doing. Her usual smirk of superiority was missing. For the first time, she seemed uncertain. I caught Cassidy's gaze as she came into the living room, pausing mid-step. "Mom, what are you doing?" she asked, attempting casualness that fell flat. I kept my eyes on the papers. "Preparing," I said simply. Ethan glanced at Doña Consuelo, then back at me. The tension was palpable, the unspoken recognition that I was no longer the passive mother-in-law or mother they assumed. My calm authority contrasted sharply with their unease, and in that moment, the house itself seemed to lean toward me, the weight of decades of work and care behind every decision I would make. Arturo confirmed that once the documents were ready, serving them would assert my rights fully. I folded the last sheet, exhaled, and felt the first surge of empowerment in years. Doña Consuelo's influence had waned. Cassidy's assumed dominance had faltered, and for the first time, I realized that standing firm in justice could coexist with the love I still held for my family. The morning sun streamed through the blinds as I carefully folded the envelopes containing the legal notices. 30 days. That was all Cassidy and Ethan had to vacate my house, the home I had poured my life into. My hands were steady now. The fear I had carried for so long had been replaced by determination. I placed the envelopes on the kitchen counter, each one addressed neatly, and waited. When Cassidy and Ethan came down for breakfast, they immediately sensed the change. Cassidy's eyes widened as she noticed the stack of papers. "Mom, what are these?" she asked, her voice laced with alarm. I met her gaze calmly. "Your notice. You have 30 days to move out." A flush of anger colored her cheeks. Ethan's jaw tightened. They exchanged looks, disbelief clear in their expressions. For a moment, the kitchen was silent except for the ticking clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Doña Consuelo appeared in the doorway, her usual confidence faltering. She opened her mouth, likely to lecture or persuade, but nothing came out. I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She had always thrived on manipulating situations, on turning Cassidy's impatience into leverage, but this time, her influence was gone. Cassidy's voice rose, incredulous. "You can't do this. This is our home, too." I remained calm, the quiet authority I had discovered in the past weeks radiating from me. I am the primary owner. I am simply exercising my legal rights. Ethan's silence was telling. Even he understood that arguing would not change the facts. The realization that I was no longer the timid, submissive mother-in-law or mother they assumed settled in. Their shock and anger were palpable, but I did not waver. I did not yell. I did not plead. For the first time, I felt the full weight of empowerment. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every anxious moment I had endured to build this home culminated here. I had transformed from the invisible, underestimated woman they thought I was into someone who demanded respect and would receive it. As they stormed out of the kitchen, muttering and fuming, I closed the door gently behind them. I exhaled, feeling the house shift around me, as if acknowledging the rightful owner had returned. I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence, tasting the calm, and knowing that the next 30 days would mark the beginning of my life reclaimed. The 30 days stretched ahead like a quiet battlefield. Each morning, I moved through the house with the same routines I had long maintained, making breakfast for Lila, tidying the rooms, checking the mail. The difference now was the awareness that each action carried weight. Every glance, every step was observed by Cassidy, Ethan, and occasionally Doña Consuelo. Lila's presence became my anchor, her small hand slipping into mine at breakfast, her cheerful chatter, her soft questions about the day's plans. She reminded me of what this fight was really about, protecting a home that held not just walls, but memories and love. I smiled more freely, my confidence growing with each interaction. Cassidy and Ethan, in contrast, were tense. Their movements through the house were quiet but deliberate. Their words clipped. Doña Consuelo appeared sporadically, attempting to intimidate with sharp remarks or questioning tones. "Are you sure you know what you're doing, Harper? 30 days isn't long," she said one afternoon, lingering at the doorway. I met her gaze steadily, nodding once, calmly returning to folding laundry. I observed them carefully, noting patterns of resistance and avoidance, small micro-tensions that could easily unravel the household dynamic. But instead of reacting, I let the moments pass, maintaining composure and dignity. Each day, I felt a subtle shift within myself. I was no longer the fearful, overlooked woman who had once allowed others' opinions to dictate her life. I was deliberate, patient, and resolute. By the second week, the house itself seemed quieter, steadier. My routines, Lila's presence, and the firm calm I carried acted like a shield. I was preparing emotionally as much as practically, knowing that enforcing my rights required not just legal steps, but a steadiness of spirit. For the first time in years, I felt fully capable of meeting the challenge ahead, ready to reclaim my space without compromising the love I still held for my family. By the third week, the tension in the house had shifted. Cassidy moved through the rooms with a tentative caution, Ethan's silent support no longer masking the unease that had settled over them. Doña Consuelo's visits became shorter, her attempts at intimidation fading into the background as they realized I would not be swayed. One morning, Cassidy approached me hesitantly, her eyes downcast. "Mom, we've started looking for a place," she admitted softly. Ethan nodded from behind, his expression careful but resigned. I smiled gently, letting them feel the calm I had cultivated through these weeks. There was no gloating, no bitterness, just a quiet assertion of my authority. I began to reinforce new boundaries. Small but firm, my schedule, my space, my decisions. Lila's presence made the process tender rather than cold. Her laughter and questions reminded me that love and firmness could coexist. "Can we bake cookies after lunch, Grandma?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. I ruffled her hair and agreed, feeling the warmth of continuity amidst change. Evenings were quieter now. Cassidy and Ethan adjusted, bringing fewer interruptions, respecting the routines I had reinstated. Doña Consuelo's influence waned entirely, her voice reduced to polite neutrality during the occasional visit. I realized that asserting authority need not sever ties. Compassion could still guide interactions without sacrificing dignity. Standing in the kitchen one afternoon, folding laundry while Lila hummed beside me, I felt a sense of balance settle in the house. Respect, once absent, was gradually returning not through fear or confrontation, but through consistent, measured action. Love remained, soft and resilient, woven into the daily rhythms I had preserved. I understood now that boundaries could coexist with care, that empowerment did not require cruelty, and that the family I had built could still function, albeit differently.